The wedding day dawned with the kind of light people often call heaven's blessing. White ribbons fluttered in the summer breeze, the church bells rang, and guests filled the courtyard with laughter and chatter. Alina stood in her gown, radiant, nervous, her hands trembling as she clutched the bouquet. Andrei's eyes never left her, full of love and pride. To everyone, it looked like the beginning of a fairy tale. But behind her polished smile, Galina carried unease. The groom's mother had always felt something was off about the girl her son chose. She couldn't explain it, just an instinct, an echo of the past whispering in her ear. And as the ceremony began, her suspicion grew unbearable. When the priest asked if anyone objected, silence hung in the air. Yet Galina's heart pounded. She noticed a look, a quick exchange between Alina and a stranger among the guests. Something snapped inside her. She stormed forward, her voice sharp, trembling with rage. "You liar! You deceived my son!" And before anyone could stop her, her hand flew across Alina's face. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The bride staggered back, clutching her cheek, tears welling up in her eyes. The bouquet fell to the ground. The guests erupted, some shouting at Galina, others whispering, while Andrei grabbed his mother's arms, shocked. "Mama, what are you doing? Have you lost your mind?" His voice cracked with disbelief. Galina's face burned, but her anger was louder than her shame. "You don't know who she really is. She's hiding something. I can see it in her eyes." Alina tried to speak, choking on sobs. "That's not true, I love him." But Galina pushed her words aside, convinced she had just saved her son from ruin. And yet, only moments later, as Galina stood trembling, she overheard two women whispering nearby. One of them, an old nurse she faintly recognized, said quietly, "If only she knew, that girl isn't just any bride. She has Galina's blood." The words pierced her like a knife. Her knees weakened, her breath caught in her throat. She turned to the nurse, demanding answers, but before she could hear the whole truth, the world spun. Her vision blurred, her body gave way. In front of the horrified guests, Galina collapsed to the floor, leaving everyone in stunned silence. The wedding had shattered in less than 30 minutes, and no one yet understood the storm that was about to unravel. The days after the ruined wedding were drenched in shame and silence. The town buzzed with gossip. People replayed the slap, the collapse, the tears, as though it were a theater show staged just for them. Alina stayed locked in her room, her wedding gown folded in a corner like a ghost that haunted her. Andrei tried to console her, swearing his love, swearing that nothing his mother did could change how he felt. Yet doubt gnawed at him. Why had his mother accused Alina so fiercely? What truth had she nearly uncovered before fainting? Galina lay in bed, her body weak, her mind spiraling. The nurse's words rang in her ears, "She has your blood." Could it be possible? Could fate have twisted so cruelly, that the girl she had despised and humiliated was in fact her own flesh and blood? Memories long buried clawed their way back. A hospital room, a wailing newborn, a moment of confusion the night her child was taken from her arms. Galina had always believed the baby died. What if that was a lie? Desperate for answers, Galina summoned her old friend Victor, now a retired investigator. He had been there when her husband pulled strings to keep certain family matters quiet. Galina begged him, her voice raw, "Find out who she is. I need to know everything about that girl." Victor agreed, but warned her that the truth might be heavier than she could bear. Meanwhile, Alina's life began to unravel. She received anonymous letters slipped under her door, words scrawled in ink, "You don't belong here." The townspeople, once smiling, now looked at her with suspicion. Her stepfather grew uneasy, avoiding her eyes, as though guarding some secret that threatened to spill. One night, Alina confronted him. "Who am I? Tell me everything." His silence was more terrifying than any answer. Andrei stood caught in the crossfire of loyalty. His heart clung to Alina, yet his mother's conviction poisoned his peace. When Galina gathered the family for a tense dinner, her hands shook as she spoke. "There is something wrong in this union," she declared. "I will uncover it, no matter the cost." The words landed like a curse. Alina's face went pale, Andrei's fists clenched, and an invisible wall rose between them. The wedding that had been shattered once now seemed impossible to piece back together. And in the shadows, Victor began his search, sifting through hospital records, old birth registries, and names connected to the maternity ward from decades ago. He soon discovered that files had been altered, pages missing, as if someone had worked hard to erase the truth. Every day, Galina became more obsessed, chasing the ghost of the child she lost. And every day, Alina felt more like a stranger in her own skin. The question grew louder in everyone's heart: was she really the woman Andrei loved, or was she someone whose bloodline would destroy them all? The family stood at the edge of a storm, and the first drops of rain had already begun to fall. The whispers in town only grew sharper with time. Everywhere Alina went, she felt eyes burning into her back, voices lowering into murmurs. At the market, women stopped their chatter when she walked by. At church, old men shook their heads as if she carried a curse. She tried to ignore it, but each day chipped away at her strength. Victor pressed deeper into the past. He tracked down a retired nurse, Irina, who had worked the maternity ward decades earlier. When he showed her Alina's picture, the woman froze. "I remember those eyes," she whispered. "That child." There was something wrong that night. Babies were moved, papers were signed quickly, and then one of them disappeared. Irina refused to say more, as though terrified of who might still be watching. Victor sensed that the trail he followed was dangerous. At home, Alina's obsession turned into paranoia. She sat up late, surrounded by boxes of old photographs and letters, searching for connections. She found an old ribbon, once tied around the wrist of her infant daughter, and convinced herself that Alina might have worn the same ribbon as a child. Each clue, however small, only tangled her heart further. She wept in secret, torn between guilt for striking Alina and fear of what it would mean if the truth was real. Alina, meanwhile, felt the walls of her world cracking. Her stepfather avoided her questions, snapping whenever she pressed. One night, she entered his study and found a locked drawer. She forced it open, discovering faded adoption papers with her name on them, but the names of her biological parents were carefully blacked out. She clutched the papers to her chest, trembling. She had always known she was adopted, but why was so much hidden? Why had her stepfather kept this secret? When she showed the papers to Andrei, his face went pale. "My mother was right," he whispered. "You've been hiding something." Alina begged him to understand, tears streaming, insisting she didn't know the truth herself. But doubt had taken root in his heart, and the love that once felt unshakable now wavered. The gossip spread even further when an anonymous envelope arrived at Galina's house. Inside was a single photograph of a newborn, marked with a number on the hospital crib. On the back, someone had written, "Look closer. She belongs to you." Galina's hands shook so violently she dropped the picture. For hours she sat in silence, staring into the child's face, convinced it was Alina. But the truth refused to come cleanly. The next day, Victor reported that the hospital files he had ordered were missing. Someone had broken into the archive and stolen them. This wasn't just a family mystery, someone wanted the past buried forever. Alina felt more isolated than ever. Andrei still loved her, but suspicion gnawed at him. Alina grew more unstable, consumed by the thought that she had destroyed her own daughter. And in the shadows of the town, someone was working carefully to ensure that no one ever uncovered the full story. The family's lives were no longer simply unraveling, they were being rewritten by hands they could not see. Storm clouds seemed to hang over the family as though the sky itself knew the truth was being hidden. Alina could not eat, could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Alina's face the moment she struck her. She was no longer sure if she had attacked an enemy or humiliated her own daughter. The uncertainty drove her to the edge of madness. Victor finally arranged for a DNA test to settle the matter once and for all. He convinced Alina to give a sample, though she was hesitant, terrified of what it might reveal. Alina too provided hers, trembling as though about to face judgment. The results were supposed to come in quietly, but somehow the entire town knew about the test before it even reached the lab. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said Alina wanted to prove Alina was her daughter, others whispered she wanted proof to destroy the girl completely. Days later, when the envelope finally arrived, the family gathered in suffocating silence. Alina's hands shook as she opened it. She read the words once, then again, her face paling. Not related, the document claimed. Alina exhaled in relief, but the victory felt bitter. Andrei turned to his mother with anger in his eyes, accusing her of ruining their lives with false suspicions. Alina, however, felt a strange coldness. Deep down, she knew something was wrong. That night, Victor stormed into her house, his face grim. "These results are worthless," he growled. "They've been tampered with." "I checked the chain of custody," someone interfered. The realization hit Alina like a thunderclap. Someone didn't just want to keep secrets, they were actively sabotaging the truth. Meanwhile, Alina began to feel the ground slipping under her feet. At night, she heard footsteps near her window. Anonymous notes kept arriving. "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." The fear gnawed at her, but so did the longing to finally understand who she was. She confronted her stepfather again, and this time his face cracked with guilt. "There are things you're not meant to know," he whispered, before locking himself away. Galina's health began to falter under the weight of it all. She fainted once again, this time at home, and doctors warned her that her heart was weak. The guilt consumed her. Was her obsession killing her? Yet the thought of leaving the mystery unsolved was worse than death itself. She began writing letters in case she didn't survive, begging forgiveness from Alina for striking her, begging Andre to believe that everything she had done was out of fear, not hate. But the family wasn't suffering alone. Somewhere, in the shadows of the town, a figure watched their every move. This unseen enemy was not only protecting the secret but feeding the family's collapse. Every tampered document, every whisper of gossip, every anonymous note, it all came from a hand determined to bury the truth forever. And so, instead of finding answers, the family found only deeper fractures. Trust between Andre and Alina cracked further. Galina's sanity thinned like glass. And Victor realized the battle ahead was no longer just about uncovering the past, it was about protecting the present from someone willing to destroy them all. The walls of the past finally began to crumble when Victor uncovered a series of letters hidden inside the belongings of a retired nurse who had recently passed away. They were brittle, yellowed with time, yet their words burned with urgency. In one of them, written shakily in ink, the nurse confessed that the night Galina gave birth, babies were quietly switched at the hospital. The reason was never clear. Some whispered it was for money, others believed it was to protect a secret affair of Galina's husband. Whatever the cause, the result was the same. Galina's child had been taken, and another baby placed in her arms. Victor handed the letters to Galina, and as she read, her breath became shallow. Her eyes darted to the name mentioned again and again, Alina. The nurse had been convinced that Alina was the child stolen from Galina's arms. The truth dropped like a stone into her chest. The girl she had slapped in front of the entire town, the bride she had tried to destroy, might have been her daughter all along. Word of the discovery spread quickly. Neighbors whispered with horror. Some pitied Galina, others shook their heads in disgust. Andre's face drained of color when he realized what this meant. If Alina was truly his mother's lost daughter, then he had nearly married his own sister. Their love, so fierce and pure, now stood on the edge of ruin. The church became the stage for the next confrontation. The priest, grim and stern, summoned the family and declared that until the truth was fully proven, the marriage could not continue. "God cannot bless what may be forbidden," he said, his voice echoing through the cold stone walls. Alina broke into sobs, clinging to Andre, who held her tightly though his hands shook. Galina stood apart, unable to meet anyone's eyes. At home, Galina collapsed onto her bed, staring at the ceiling as the weight of guilt crushed her. She whispered to herself over and over, "I struck her, I struck my own blood." No matter how she tried to breathe, the image of Alina's tear-stained face on the wedding day haunted her like a curse. But even in the midst of despair, questions remained. If Alina was indeed her daughter, why had the nurse left the truth hidden for so long? Who ordered the switch, and why were the hospital records still missing? Victor insisted the conspiracy was deeper than a single nurse's actions. Someone powerful had wanted Galina's child erased from her life. Alina, torn between grief and confusion, began to doubt her entire existence. Her stepfather's silence weighed heavier now, his refusal to explain growing more suspicious. Late one night, she demanded answers. His voice trembled as he finally admitted, "I knew from the beginning. But I was told to keep it quiet, for your own protection." He would say no more, leaving Alina reeling with betrayal. The once bright love story between her and Andre darkened into uncertainty. Could they continue to love each other if fate had tied them together by blood? Or would they be forced to part forever? The truth had surfaced, but it didn't bring peace, it shattered what little hope remained. The family, once bound by celebration, was now bound by a scandal that could not be undone. The revelation of the nurse's letters tore through the family like a storm, but just when it seemed the truth was clear, a darker layer surfaced. Victor, unsatisfied with half answers, continued digging. He traveled to the city, hospital archives, bribed clerks, and combed through old registries. What he uncovered shook even his seasoned nerves. There was mention of another infant, one born on the same night as Galina's child, but registered under a different name. The father listed was none other than Galina's late husband. The implication was horrifying. If true, Alina might not be Galina's daughter at all, but the product of her husband's hidden affair. That would mean Alina was not Andrei's sister, but his half-sister. A bond still forbidden, a love still cursed. When Victor presented this to Galina, she nearly screamed. Her chest tightened, and she clawed at her throat as though she couldn't breathe. Her entire life with her husband suddenly unraveled before her eyes. Had he betrayed her so deeply, all while she mourned the child she believed she'd lost? She had devoted decades to his memory, and now even in the grave, he managed to destroy her peace. Alina, hearing the rumor from whispers in town before Galina could speak to her, collapsed in a flood of tears. Everything she thought she knew about herself had already been stripped away, now even her blood was in question. Am I anyone's daughter? She cried into Andrei's arms. Or am I just someone's mistake? Andrei tried to hold on, tried to steady her, but the knowledge burned inside him. If she was truly his half-sister, their love would remain tainted forever. For the first time, he pulled away from her, not out of anger but out of despair. The distance between them cut Alina deeper than any insult ever could. Galina, guilt-ridden and half-mad with grief, began speaking to her dead husband's portrait at night. Why did you do this? Why did you betray me? Why did you curse our children? Her mind spiraled into paranoia. She stopped leaving the house, convinced neighbors were mocking her, that strangers were whispering the word incest behind her back. Victor pressed further and found that the trail of documents had deliberate fingerprints of manipulation, birth dates shifted, signatures forged, names scratched out. Someone powerful had carefully rewritten history. The conspiracy was no longer just about a baby stolen in the night, it was about a family's entire identity being engineered. Meanwhile, Alina's stepfather grew restless. One evening, drunk and broken, he revealed a fragment of the truth. Your mother wasn't supposed to know, no one was supposed to know. Promises were made. He collapsed into silence again, leaving Alina trembling with more questions than answers. The love story that once held hope now teetered on the edge of ruin. Andrei, tormented, prayed alone in the church for guidance, while Alina stood outside, unable to step in, feeling unworthy of God's blessing. The family was drowning in secrets. Each revelation shifted the ground beneath their feet, and yet the full truth still lay buried. Galina knew it, Victor knew it, and even Alina could feel it. There was another piece, hidden by someone who would stop at nothing to keep it in the shadows. The cruelest part was that love had not died, it burned fiercely between Andrei and Alina. But it was a fire trapped in chains, a passion that threatened to consume them both if the truth was never set free. The house had only just begun to quiet when a knock shattered the fragile silence. It was a rainy evening, the kind that made shadows seem heavier than usual. Galina opened the door, and standing there was a young woman with piercing eyes, soaked from the storm. She introduced herself with a trembling voice. My name is Irina, I believe I'm your daughter. The words stole the air from Galina's lungs. For a moment, she simply stared, her hand pressed against the doorframe to keep herself from collapsing. Irina held out a small velvet pouch. Inside was a ribbon identical to the one Galina remembered tying around her newborn's wrist the night she gave birth. The resemblance was uncanny, the same cheekbones, the same eyes that Galina once saw in the mirror. Tears welled in Galina's eyes as she pulled the girl into her arms. Alina, watching from the stairwell, felt her heart sink. She had barely begun to accept the possibility that she might be Galina's child, and now another woman had arrived with undeniable proof. The little sliver of belonging she had clung to was ripped away in an instant. Irina quickly ingratiated herself into the household. She spoke softly, carried herself with grace, and addressed Galina with tenderness. Galina, desperate for forgiveness and desperate to finally believe she had found her child, poured her love onto this stranger. For the first time in months, Galina smiled again. She sat with Irina for hours, holding her hand, listening to her stories of hardship, convincing herself that fate had finally given her a second chance. Andrei, however, was not so easily swayed. He studied Irina with suspicion. Something about her story felt rehearsed. The documents she provided, birth records, photographs, were almost too perfect, as if stitched together by unseen hands. But when he voiced his doubts, Galina silenced him, her voice sharp with maternal fury. Do not take this from me, Andrei. I lost her once. I will not lose her again. Alina's world crumbled further. She became an outsider in the very house where she once dreamed of belonging. Galina avoided her, treating her with polite distance, as if she were nothing more than the girl who had nearly married her son. The pain was unbearable. She considered leaving town altogether, but Andrei begged her not to. "I don't trust this woman," he whispered to Alina at night. "Something isn't right." Victor began investigating Irina quietly, sensing the same unease. He discovered that Irina had no childhood medical records, no trace of school enrollment until her teenage years. She had appeared in the world out of nowhere. The more he dug, the clearer it became that someone had carefully crafted her identity. Irina, sensing the investigation, grew cunning. She began planting seeds of doubt in Galina's mind. "Alina resents you," she whispered. "She wishes you had never discovered the truth. She'll never forgive you for rejecting her." Galina, fragile and guilty, allowed those words to take root. Slowly, her affection for Alina cooled further, while her attachment to Irina deepened into obsession. The house became a battlefield of silence and stolen glances. Alina felt her very existence slipping away. Andrei clung to her, but their bond was strained by the poison Irina spread. Galina, blind with hope, didn't notice the wedge driving her family apart. What none of them knew was that Irina wasn't acting alone. At night, she met with a shadowed figure in secret, handing over reports of everything happening in the house. Each time, the figure would nod with satisfaction. "Keep her close," he said. "The longer she believes, the deeper she'll fall." The family believed they had found the missing piece of their past, but in truth, a far more dangerous game had just begun. The tension in the house thickened with every passing day. Irina's presence changed everything. She moved with confidence now, as though she already owned her place in Galina's heart. She would sit at the dinner table in Galina's seat, pour her tea from Galina's favorite cup, and slip into stories about a childhood she claimed to remember in fragments: a lullaby, a favorite toy, the smell of roses in the garden. Galina clung to every word, tears in her eyes, convinced she was finally hearing echoes of the daughter she had lost. Alina could barely stand it. She watched silently as the woman stole what little belongings she had left. When she tried to protest, Galina would silence her. "You had your chance," she would whisper coldly. "Don't ruin this for me." The words stabbed deeper than any slap. Alina began to drift like a ghost through the house, unwelcome in the place where she once believed she might become family. Irina noticed the cracks forming and fed them. She whispered into Galina's ear that Alina was dangerous, that she was jealous, that she would try to break their bond. She told Andrei in private that Alina was hiding even more secrets than anyone knew. Each carefully planted lie grew roots, and soon suspicion clouded the air around Alina no matter what she did. But Andrei resisted Irina's manipulations more than anyone else. Though his faith was shaken, he refused to turn away from Alina. His love, though battered, remained steady. He started watching Irina closely, noting the inconsistencies in her stories. "You say you remember a garden," he pressed one night, "but we didn't even move into a house with a garden until years after the birth." Irina faltered, her eyes narrowing for only a second before she covered it with a smile. Still, Andrei caught the slip. Victor, too, continued his quiet search for truth. He tracked Irina's background, following a trail that led to nothing but empty records. No childhood doctors, no school certificates until the age of 16. It was as if she had been created out of thin air. One evening, after weeks of digging, he uncovered a shocking lead. Irina had connections to a man who once sought revenge against Galina's late husband, a business rival ruined years ago by his deals. It became clear, Irina wasn't a daughter. She was a weapon. As Victor prepared to confront Galina with his findings, Irina tightened her grip. She staged moments to humiliate Alina further. One afternoon, Galina's friends visited, and Irina presented herself as the perfect daughter, showing them the ribbon, the photographs, the forged documents. Alina walked in halfway through and heard one of the women say, "She truly looks like you, Galina. The resemblance is uncanny." Alina's face burned, tears threatening to spill as she turned and walked out, no longer able to fight for a place she was never allowed to have. That night, Andrei found Alina sitting by the river, clutching the adoption papers she had discovered weeks before. "Maybe I should leave," she whispered. "I don't belong anywhere, not with you, not with her, not even with myself." Andrei pulled her close, his voice firm. "Don't let them erase you. Don't let her win." His words steadied her, but her heart still trembled. Irina, however, grew bold. She began speaking of inheritance, of claiming what was rightfully hers. She hinted at selling property, at controlling the household, at being the daughter Galina deserved. Galina, blinded by guilt and longing, listened. But deep inside, a small part of her began to wonder why Irina seemed more interested in money and power than love. And then came the night Victor arrived, his face pale with urgency. He laid the forged documents before Galina and spoke the truth she had been too desperate to see. This woman is not your daughter. She's been planted here. Someone is using her to destroy what little remains of your family. Galina's world tilted again, but this time it wasn't grief that overcame her, it was fury. She looked at Irina, who sat calmly, almost smiling, as if she had expected this. For the first time, doubt entered Galina's eyes. The stage was set for the mask to finally fall. But Irina wasn't done. She still had secrets left to reveal, and the damage she had caused was already almost irreversible. The house that had once been filled with whispers of joy now pulsed with rage and fear. Galina sat frozen in her chair, the forged documents Victor had brought spread before her like evidence at a trial. Her heart pounded as she looked from the papers to Irina's calm, almost defiant face. For the first time since Irina's arrival, Galina saw not the daughter she had longed for, but a stranger cloaked in deception. And who are you really? Galina's voice cracked as she spoke, more fragile than fierce. What do you want from us? Irina leaned back in her chair, her eyes glinting with cold amusement. I wanted exactly what I got, she replied smoothly. Your trust, your weakness, and soon, everything that belongs to you. Her mask slipped fully when Victor cornered her with the name of her benefactor, Sergei Milov, the ruined business rival of Galina's late husband. Years ago, Sergei had lost everything in a deal that left him bankrupt and disgraced. He had vowed revenge on Galina's family, and now, through Irina, his promise lived on. Galina's body trembled, her breath shallow. So all this time, you were never my child, she whispered. Irina's smirk was cruel. No, but for a while, you wished I was, didn't you? That's what made it so easy. Andrei's fury boiled over. He slammed his hand on the table, his voice echoing through the room. You came here to destroy us, and you almost succeeded. You turned my mother against the woman I love. You poisoned everything. He moved protectively toward Alina, who stood pale and silent, her eyes shimmering with both fear and vindication. Irina laughed softly, the sound like broken glass. I didn't have to poison anything. I just showed your family how easily it could be torn apart. The truth was always your enemy, not me. But Victor had uncovered more than just Irina's deception. He revealed that the missing hospital files, the ones that could prove Alina's true origins, had been stolen and hidden by Sergei's men. They had wanted Galina to suffer, to never know peace, to doubt herself until her dying breath. The weight of it all finally crushed Galina. She collapsed to her knees, sobbing, the sound raw and broken. I destroyed her, she cried, pointing toward Alina. I raised my hand against my own child. I let a viper into my home and pushed my blood away. God, what have I done? Her guilt consumed her, the image of Alina's tear-streaked face on the wedding day flashing like a wound that would never heal. Alina approached slowly, her steps hesitant, her heart torn between anger and compassion. She looked at Galina, her lips trembling. For so long, she had longed to belong, to be accepted, to be loved. And though the betrayal cut deep, she could see the woman before her was already broken by her own mistakes. Irina, realizing her plan was unraveling, tried one last strike. She pulled a knife from her coat pocket, her eyes wild. If I can't have this family, then no one will, she hissed, lunging forward. The room erupted in chaos. Andrei threw himself in front of Alina, Victor grabbed Irina's arm, and the struggle sent the knife clattering across the floor. In seconds, the intruder's power was gone. Police, called by Victor ahead of time, burst in and dragged her away, her voice echoing with curses as she screamed promises of unfinished revenge. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. Galina reached out to Alina with trembling hands, her voice breaking. Forgive me, please, forgive me. The truth was now undeniable. Irina had been a fraud. The enemy had been exposed. But what lingered was the devastation left behind, the fractured trust, the love scarred by suspicion, the family torn between blood and betrayal. As the police car disappeared into the night, Alina whispered to Andrei, if this is what truth looks like, maybe we weren't meant to have peace. He held her close, his voice fierce despite the sorrow, no. We'll rebuild it, together. Yet deep in her heart, Alina wondered, Was the worst truly over, or had they only uncovered one layer of a past that would never stop haunting them? The dust of Irina's betrayal lingered in every corner of the house. Even after she was taken away, her shadow seemed to stretch across the walls, reminding them of the lies they had believed. Alina hardly left her bed for days, consumed with shame. Her heart was frail, her spirit weaker still. She replayed every word she had said to Alina, every harsh look, every cruel gesture. The memory of striking her daughter before the world was a wound that refused to close. Alina, though wounded herself, carried a gentleness that surprised even her. She would stand quietly at Galina's doorway at night, watching the older woman toss in restless sleep, torn between the desire to turn away and the quiet ache to comfort her. She remembered how unwanted she had felt, how easily Galina had chosen another over her. And yet, deep in her chest, there was still the longing for a mother's embrace. One evening, Galina finally rose, her body weak but her eyes determined. She gathered the family in the parlor. Her voice trembled, but every word carried weight. I was blind, she admitted. Blinded by grief, by pride, by fear. I pushed away my own blood and welcomed a serpent. I cannot undo what I've done, but I beg, Alina, forgive me. Her voice broke, and she fell to her knees before the girl she had once humiliated. The room was silent but for the sound of Galina's sobs. Alina's chest tightened, tears filling her eyes. She stepped forward, hesitated, then reached down to lift Galina up. I can't erase what happened, she whispered, but I can't carry this hatred forever. If you truly want me as your daughter, then I will try. Galina collapsed into her arms, clinging to her as though to life itself. The reconciliation did not erase the pain overnight, but it planted a seed of healing. Andrei, witnessing the moment, felt hope return to him for the first time in months. His love for Alina had never wavered, but now it had the blessing he needed most, his mother's acceptance. Together, they made the decision to try again. Another wedding was planned, this time smaller, quieter, stripped of the pomp and gossip that had destroyed the first. Invitations were whispered rather than shouted, flowers simple rather than extravagant. The day arrived with sunlight spilling like gold across the church steps. Guests gathered, their faces filled with anticipation not of scandal, but of peace. Alina walked down the aisle, her dress simple but elegant, her eyes locked on Andrei's. Galina, seated in the front row, wept openly, clutching Victor's hand for strength. Every step Alina took was a victory over the lies, the betrayals, the secrets that had haunted them. When the priest asked the familiar question, if anyone objected, the silence was pure and sacred. No interruptions, no chaos, no slaps. Only stillness, as though even heaven was watching with bated breath. Andrei and Alina exchanged vows, their voices breaking with emotion. When they kissed, the applause was not loud but heartfelt, a collective sigh of relief that love had survived what seemed impossible. Galina rose slowly, her heart fragile but lighter than it had been in decades. She stepped forward, touched Alina's cheek with trembling fingers, and whispered so only she could hear, if only I had known the truth that day, I would have embraced you instead of striking you. Alina smiled through tears, her hand covering Galina's. Now you do, she replied softly. The story that had begun in scandal ended in forgiveness. The scars remained, but they no longer bled. Love, battered, tested, and almost destroyed, had endured. And though the past could never be erased, the family walked forward with hope, bound not by lies or vengeance, but by the hard-earned truth.